Yesterday at church, our Bible class in the morning is a lesson on adjusting your attitude. I think it's attitude adjustments is the title that Drew gave it, and it's been good. It's really interesting as our his classes usually. Um, but yesterday's was about like choosing positivity over negativity, and there are a few things from that lesson that really kind of stuck out to me and kind of like reinforced some of the stuff that I was thinking about. It brought up memories of like my grandmother. My grandmother's been on my brain recently. The last few days, I've been thinking a lot about her, and I think it's because the anniversary of her passing is coming. And at the beginning of February, it'll be 10 years since she left us. And I cannot believe it's been 10 years. That actually, I had to look that up to make sure that I was right about that because it feels like yesterday. Like, I can still hear her saying my name, and I can hear her saying Reagan's name. She always used to be like, Mindy, I'm your grandma. And then she would say something. It was always like or usually in a tone that was like I was in trouble. Didn't matter what it was. But I've been thinking about her, I think, a lot lately. Anytime that my kids get sick, I think about my grandma. She was like always around when Reagan and Riley were sick, and it was so it's just something that always sticks out to me. So there was this one time, or not one time, it was several times. The kids, when they were little, had issues. We would go to the hospital every now and then. Like Reagan once had croup so bad she stopped breathing, and we had to call the ambulance. And then Riley had like this crazy rash and fever one time when he was 1.5 and had to be admitted. They both got admitted. Actually, the year that she passed. So 10 years ago, we were at the hospital with both kids. Riley had been admitted for dehydration. Reagan had a fever for 15 days, and we couldn't figure out what the cause was. So, so those two visits, like 10 years ago, she was not at the hospital because she was very, very sick herself, and because my kids were sick, she couldn't be near them. But like the one where Riley was had the rash and had to be admitted, and I think even I want to say she was there when Reagan had to be ambulanced to the hospital. I feel like she showed up, but I will never forget. It was like midnight, and the hospital in my hometown that had the children's ER was at the was on the same highway exit that my grandmother lived on. And I don't know how she knew that we were there. Like, she just kind of always had this sixth sense, or realistically, it was probably either Facebook or my mom. But she would show up. So we were there. I remember I was there with Riley, and he was so little. He was so little, and he was so fragile, and I didn't know what was going on. Somewhere I have a picture of me holding him, and he's got like his IV in his arm, so it's like on the board. Like when they're teeny tiny, they put them on like an immovable board and tape their arm to it so they can't mess with the IV. And he had this rash, and we didn't know what was going on. And I was at the hospital emergency room, talking to people, and in walks my grandmother, and it's like midnight, and she's got 2 McDonald's coffees in her hand and her little pink velour jumpsuit that she wore all the time, and she just comes right in, like she owned the place, and like I had known she was coming, and I'm like, Grandma, what are you doing here? Well, we called her Lala. Lala, what are you doing here? And she was like, Mindy, I'm your grandma. You can't tell me not to be here. And I was like, I didn't tell you not to be here. I just was wondering, like, how you knew. And then she's like, I brought coffee. and you can't tell me to leave. I'm your grandma. You can't tell me to leave. And I'm like, okay. And then she sat down, and I would never have told her to leave anyway. I appreciated that so much. And that's the things that I miss. Like, it's crazy. Every time that my kids have gotten sick in the last 10 years, I have wanted her to call me, to tell me that, Mindy, I'm your grandma. You need to listen to me. You should be giving your kids vitamins. Doesn't matter that they actually did do vitamins and still got sick. But like, that's what she would say. She would call me and say, Mindy, I'm your grandma. You need to listen to me. Your kids need vitamins. And then she would go on, like, whatever. Tell me what's wrong with the kids. And she would bring coffee all the time. She was just always there. But and she was there for so much more than just their being sick. But I miss it. And I miss her every time that they're sick. Every single time. Every time I go to the doctor, I want her to call. And every time that we've ever had to take Riley to the emergency room, I know she would have been there. So, it stinks to lose somebody. But so kids haven't really been sick this year. I don't, Reagan's got some stuff going on, but like, it's not a big deal. So there hasn't been like a bunch of that. I think it's probably more the anniversary coming up that's made me think about her, and I just really miss her. And I feel like, I don't know, she's just been on my brain. So, so I did want to talk about her. I had already planned to talk about her. And then in yesterday's class, they talked about choosing to be joyful and rejoice even in situations that, maybe don't seem great. And then, as Christians, when somebody dies, like, we don't have to be, we can miss them. Like, I miss my Lala, but it doesn't have to destroy me and overtake me because I'm a Christian, she was a Christian, and I get to see her again. And I have that hope that I'll get to be with her again. And I'm sure she's tallying how many times that we've gone to the hospital and been sick. So I'm sure that I'll hear it from her, but I'm a grandma, when I walk through the gates. So there's peace in that, and there's a lot of peace in that, and a lot of joy and hope and stuff. So a couple months ago, I had like a really rough week. I don't exactly remember what happened necessarily, and it may have been that nothing really happened. I just kind of fell into like this funk. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what was making me overwhelmingly sad. I don't think grief is, I know it's not unique to me. Everybody goes through stages of grief. I think grief is a journey, right? We're always and I think it's a journey that everybody's always on. You're just in different moments of it, depending on where you are and where you are in the journey, in the process, and what has, like, which specific loss. We lose things all the time. We lose things and people and, you know, relationships, jobs, people that we love. Loss is a, poopy reality here, on Earth. So it's part of the human condition, just something that you have to deal with. So, and I've always kind of had that mindset. And I definitely have always had that mindset looking back on all of these things that we've been going through together. This stuff that I've been talking about in these chapters, and how, I didn't make a conscious choice about that. That wasn't like, oh, look at how great, um, how strong or whatever I am. It just was, I think, something that I always just did. I always chose to just keep plowing forward. There was nothing uniquely special about this stuff that I went through. It was horrible, but I'm not the only person in the world who's ever experienced that. And And I have just always known that this is temporary here. This is temporary. So, like, I can deal with it and suffer through it. And, well, I don't even want to say suffer through it because I don't feel like I have. I know I know that I was not dealing with it in a healthy way because locking it up and never looking at it is not dealing with it. However, I was also, by that conscious decision, deciding not to just wallow in it too. I could have, I guess, let it overcome me and like overtake everything in my world and make me just, sad, depressed um person, even going down a much worse road. But so I did decide that that wasn't going to happen. That was a conscious choice. I never strayed too far away from my church life. I think I talked about this in one of the writings, but like I just kind of went through the motions for a long time at church, but I never left it because I always knew I was going to need that. I was going to need something much bigger than me. I was going to need God to get me out of this alive, to help me get through things and to not allow all of the things that have transpired to cause me to drown. So I think of it as like being on a train. So a train runs on the tracks, right? And I was on the train and I was going, and that was like my life, my church life, the plan that I had, that I thought I was going to go on. Like if the train tracks are like my relationship with God, I was on that. The stuff that happened after the abusive relationship as a teenager. So after the incident with the car and right before court, I did write about this, but in that span, it was really right before court. I have not talked about any of this to anybody, but like I I was getting nervous about court coming up. I didn't know what to expect, what it was going to be like. There was a moment at church where in Bible class, like somebody mentioned, somebody who was at that moment a friend of mine said that we needed to pray for the guy, she named him, because Mindy was making stuff up about him, and um, there was a court thing. And when I tell you that that felt like being hit by a bus, I mean, it was like the bus hit me and it went very slowly over me and then backed up and hit me again and then went forward and hit me again and then went back and hit me again. That's how it felt. And I sat there. I sat there while we prayed for this kid. And that moment, it was that moment that I got knocked off my train. But I did not go like wandering off in the woods or take some other path. Kind of walked next to the train tracks. Feel like that's how I feel like the next, 7, 8 years went. I was walking next to the tracks. I saw trains every now and then. I went to church every week. And I was there physically, but I was kind of emotionally, mentally checking out. I knew I needed it, so I knew I couldn't go too far, but I also was really struggling with what had just happened. What had just happened with the relationship is one thing. What just happened with my friendship, and church is where you're supposed to feel like you're safest, and that should be the safest place for you. And it became the most dangerous place for me in an instant. So I struggled with that. That was very hard for me. I absolutely checked out. My mom asked me like a year or two ago about that. We had been chatting about youth groups because my kids are real active in theirs here. And she was like, "You used to be real active, like, and then all of a sudden you just stopped. And I don't know why." And I was like, "Oh, I do." And then I told her. So that's another crappy thing, right? Like I didn't even tell my mom. So I just kind of sat there. My mom said that the youth leader like did call her and was like, what's going on? I heard that Mindy's kind of making stuff up, and my mom was like, she's not making anything up. But my mom never told me that, and I'm glad she didn't, because it would have made me very uncomfortable. It probably would have done more damage than just the situation that happened. But yeah, I that moment at church that night hurt more than that hurt more than the actual relationship. That hurt more than I would say honestly that rivaled the rape in pain and in shaking my not belief system, because it did not affect my spiritual beliefs, but it affected my belief in other people, and it affected the way that I looked at other people. If the rape affected the way that I looked at myself, that moment in Bible class that night affected the way I looked at everybody else. Yeah, that's probably a good way to say that. So that moment has both hurt and helped me, I think. I do think that that moment taught me a few different hard but really important lessons. I think it taught me that people mess up and make mistakes. The friend who was not a friend from that moment on, like that was it. But that when she did that, she thought she was doing the right thing. I'm going to give her that credit anyway, because I don't know. I never talked to her again. So I don't know that there was ever a thing. I honestly don't think she would even remember this moment. If she happened to see this video, she would maybe not even realize I'm talking about her. I have always kind of given her the benefit of the doubt there, that she was acting in a way that she assumed was the right way. I did not tell anybody about the car accident. No one knew about that except my best friend, the one I told you was driving around town, because he found out from my parents because he was at my house all the time. And he felt bad because that was the day he left school early before I did. And that's when I found out that he had been following me around trying to make sure I was safe. So he knew about it, but I didn't talk about the details. I did not explain to everybody what that was. So if you haven't seen that, go back and look at chapter 3, because that's where I talk about this. I just did not go through that moment. I think that moment was so scary, and looking back on it and when I rewatched it, I realized how dangerous that day was for me. I pushed that all aside. So I did not talk about it. I'd never spoken to this friend about this car incident that happened. My mom wants me to call it assault. So, because that's what it was. But I had never spoken to her about it. So she did not have my side of things. That was also the first time I'd heard anything about him since, actually since the accident day. So I was taken back by it. I actually felt bad for everybody else in the room, because it was real clear that I think it was real clear at that moment that, like, the teacher had no idea what to do. And I was asked, like, do you want to say anything? Or like, what? And I didn't. I just sat there. I didn't clarify anything. I realized then also that everybody is flawed. Everybody makes mistakes. There are no perfect people. I know Christians sometimes want to portray this, or they have. This is going to come out weird and probably wrong, but there's like this stereotype, right, that of Christian superiority. That veil was lifted that day for me. I have never seen anybody inside a church as anything other than a sinner and somebody who's flawed and has issues. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I actually think that's one of the good things, because then as people, for the next, forever, until I die, whenever anybody makes mistakes in regardless of their position inside the church or, um, my relationship to them outside the church, anybody, I understand like people make mistakes and they don't always mean it in a really bad thing, and it's not always something that should be negative. Or it's not always something that should be held against them forever. I don't think I held that thing against her. I did not want to be friends with her after that. I think those are different things. I never spoke to her about it. So I think if you hold something against someone, then it's like maybe brought up more than whatever. I've never spoken to her about that. It also, I think most importantly, it um, it taught me this lesson that I've taught the kids, or that I've been trying to teach my kids, that be very, very careful with what you say, and be very, very careful about um, chiming in on a situation that you are not involved in, because your opinion might be wrong, and your opinion might be so painful to somebody else who hears it. And I have laid this whole situation out for my two bigger kids, and they know this situation, they know this moment. I said, this moment for my friend in church meant nothing to her. I'm sure she has no idea that this happened, but that moment almost took me entirely away from the church. That moment almost killed my relationship with God, because I wanted not much to do with the church. And it meant nothing to the person who said it. It meant everything to me who heard it. It's not something that can be taken back. Even if she had realized it in that moment, and even if we had had conversations, um, even if we had had conversations in like the, years or months or whatever after that, um, it would not have changed the way that moment felt. It wouldn't have changed. I don't think it would have changed anything for me. Words are like toothpaste. Once they come out of the tube, you can't put them back in. So you have to be very careful with what you say, especially if it's not a situation that you were involved in the first place. No one was there the day that the car assault happened. It was me and the kid, and the four I almost hit, the police, and my mom, and eventually his mom. That's it. No one else has an opinion about that day because nobody else was there. It was an innocuous moment for everybody else who was around, and it was like this unbelievably painful, defining day for me. But like I said, I didn't let that kill my relationship with God. I did not let that kill my spiritual journey. I did let it derail me. I don't think I let it derail me. It derailed me. I knew I needed it. I knew I couldn't get out of it totally, and that I was going to need to get back on the tracks later, or I wasn't going to survive the whole situation. So I think, though, that that's probably the biggest and best lesson that came out of that horrible day was to be very mindful of what you say, and be very mindful of chiming in on a situation you weren't involved in. And I hope and pray that I am doing a good enough job teaching my kids that, because that hurts so much. I have no idea how I got there from my grandma, but I think it still kind of goes with the whole choosing positivity. No clue. Oh man, apparently I needed to get that out.